Okay, well, it's Sunday morning here, and we're on lesson number 39 of a workbook of A Course in Miracles. And perhaps it's a seminal lesson for me and possibly for you if you begin to read what it actually is saying. Lesson number 39 says, "My holiness is the salvation of the world." And let's take a look at what it says just in the first paragraph, and look into your own mind about what you think of A Course in Miracles itself, and see if you recognize or can admit to what he is saying as true, so as to have something to true up to in your own mind to see the falsity of the thinking with which we have thought we thought. So in the first paragraph alone, what he says is, if guilt is hell, what is the opposite? Like the text for which this workbook was written. Remember, it's in doing the exercises, it's in doing these exercises that the meaning of the text becomes revealed to you, because in doing the exercises, we begin to get effects that show us and help clarify and understand the terms that are being used in the text to allow the experience to prove that not only and demonstrate not only is what Jesus is saying is true, but we have the ability to be true, to be whole, and to be perfect, exactly as we're sitting here right now. And you'll see why as we go along in this today's workbook lesson. Like the text for which this workbook was written, the ideas which are used for the exercise are very clear, very simple, and totally unambiguous. Now, strictly speaking, if I were to look at that reasonably, what I would say is, if I accept this to be true, and this is the way I was taught to utilize the entire Course in Miracles, and which perhaps is why it took me so long to go through the text as slowly as I did, because there was a constant confrontation in my own mind and heart with the meaning I had given simple terms and the complexity with which I was experiencing the terms of my own existence. Now, when I had the simplicity of Jesus' word and Jesus himself, and I looked at my complexity in the light of the simplicity, I had to admit that I was not understanding and I needed correction to understand and clarity to see who I was. So, the ideas which are used for the exercise are very simple, very clear, and totally unambiguous. There's no contradiction in it. There's no inconsistency in it. I don't care what anyone has told you. The inconsistency and the lack of continuity is always in the mind of the perceiver, who is living in a state of denial here within the world of space and time, denying his own reality, denying his own existence in reality, and denying that reality is perfect, whole, and completely simple in its wholeness and its unambiguity, because there's no contradictions. There's nothing to contrast and conflict. Here in space and time, we learn through the opposition and comparisons that we see. So if we let this be true, we have something we can true up to by recognizing within ourselves the healing that is required, and giving ourselves the ability to see a light or have a light within us that can sort things out for us, because obviously we have not been able to do that. That's the simple admission that this requires. We're not concerned with intellectual feats nor logical toys. We are dealing only in the very obvious, which has been overlooked in the clouds of complexity in which you think you think. Now, personally speaking, in my own experience, one of the things that I have noticed is, and this is the importance of recognizing the point in which your own mind, where you're experiencing, let's say, an error or a mistaken understanding, and not using our own thinking to justify, rationalize, intellectualize, or spiritualize our thoughts in order to cloud over the simplicity of our own need with the complexity of the egoic thinking. The further we get away, and this is the nature, let's say, of the Big Bang Theory and the cosmos, the further we get away from the tiny blast zone that the error seemed to have occurred in, the further out that we get into the far reaches, the more and more obscure that tiny mad idea seems to become within the clouds of complexity that we think we see, in place of where the tiny mad idea is still functioning within our own mind and our heart. So the further we get to the blast zone, the less we're looking at the effects of the blast, and the more we're looking at the clouds that are the effect of the blast zone, rather than the tiny mad idea within it exists in all of us, and within which, in our minds, within which we're asking for the correction for that tiny mad idea. And today is the beginning of our ability to see how small the idea is and how we can get the correction in any point in time if we so desire. We are dealing only in the very obvious, which has been overlooked in the clouds of complexity in which you think you think. If guilt is hell, what is its opposite? This is not difficult, surely. The hesitation you may feel in answering is not due to the ambiguity of the question, because everything in this course is posed in a binary way. It's a yes or no. It's the simplicity of it. Either it's true or it's false. In the clouds of the complexity in which we think, things become complicated, and there's all this gray area, which is what the clouds are. It's the gray area where we get lost, and the simplicity of the question we're being asked gets hazy. And we're dealing with the haze rather than the simplicity. If guilt is hell, what is its opposite? This is not difficult. Surely the hesitation you may feel in answering is not due to the ambiguity of the question, but do you believe that guilt is hell? If you did, and here we go, here's the simplicity, if you did, you would see at once how direct and simple the text is. And you would not need a workbook at all. Now, of course, the ego is going to co-opt that to try to tell you don't need the workbook because you can see the simplicity, but you're already into the workbook. So keep up, just keep up until you can feel the guidance and hear the guidance within your own mind, and begin to follow the guidance that you receive in your own mind. And believe me, I wouldn't settle for inspiration. I wouldn't settle for signs and symbols. I wouldn't settle until I experienced the direct voice for God answering me very specifically within my own heart and mind, because that's what I was trained to do, and to make no compromises where that seemed to play a part, and to make no compromises in what the Course was saying. If it's a voice for God, there's a voice for God that will speak to you if and when you're ready to hear that voice, rather than the complexity that seems to exist in the clouds of the different ways in which guidance can show up to rationalize away the need to hear the voice for God within your own heart and mind. The hesitation you may feel in answering is not due to the ambiguity of the question, but do you believe guilt is hell? If you did, you would see at once how direct and simple the text is, and you would not need a workbook at all. No one needs to practice to gain what is already his. Hence, the preface to this series, in a sense, is there's nothing to get. You've already been given everything. So we're taking a journey one day at a time in which we make the remarkable discovery that we're not egos here to get. We're not created for getting, even though we have forgotten that. We were created by God to show forth his goodness in giving himself to us as ourself, so that we may give as we've been given, so we can continue to receive more of what has already been given. And that loses meaning when we think the world is composed of little discrete parts, some of which we have and some of which we don't have. We all have a totality of a world in our consciousness that's available to us when we give up the need for separation and we give up the idea of there is differentiation. And that's when, how Jesus lived in his ability to seemingly manifest from thin air everything that was needed in any given moment, because he understood that the nature of differentiation of substance was merely made by a mind that was requiring differentiations of substance in order to sustain itself. And love, being all there is, could be made manifest to fulfill everyone's need exactly as they were finding themselves needy, until the moment when they recognized that their own true need was to give up the world in which need was, and recognize that they had been given everything, and they are God's love. We have already said that your holiness is the salvation of the world. What about your own salvation? You cannot give what you do not have. A Savior must be saved. How else can he teach salvation? One of the reasons why I like this lesson, and I think it's seminal, is because my initial revelation and my experience of awakening that I went through a while back continues to become more and more meaningful to me in that moment when I recognized that I truly was saved. And salvation seems to have a negative connotation in that we think there's something that we need to be saved from, which is why it has sort of like contains the fear of God, as if we did something wrong. When you find out all that we've been saved from is from our own thinking, and the thinking the world has tried to impose upon us as being our true reality, when in fact it's not. I have news for you. You've already been saved because I've already been saved. And this is the good news. My salvation came in the moment I was willing to listen to Jesus and say yes, and let him be my guide back home to the recognition that God is love, and therefore so am I. And this nightmare, this dream, which was previously a nightmare to me, became one in which I was given the ability to express the glad tidings of salvation, and knowing for a fact that if I am saved, all the world is saved with me. And I assure you that I am saved. And that assurance is the everlasting arms that I rest in whenever I find myself in a moment of consternation, thinking that I might be in hell once again. There are no more demons. There are no more demons to conquer. There's only the good news, the joyous news of salvation to spread. Now, salvation is a concept. It's an experience that demonstrates to you your own true reality, and the fact that none of this has ever been able to affect who you really are as the Son of God. And I assure you, you are God's Son. No other son does he have. And that holiness envelops the entire world, and in the recognition of your own holiness, what you find is there's nothing left for you to do but to extend that holiness to become more and more inclusive of everything your eyes and your heart touch upon. So let me give you the good news this Sunday. Let this be the gospel for you. You are saved along with me, and we truly have been saved. We've been saved by the grace of God from our own our own vain imaginings that something could exist that could mar the perfection and beauty of God's creation. That something could only be other than love, and there is no such thing in reality as anything other than love. That's not to say that within the illusion of space and time, our consciousness association, which is the illusion of space and time, that doesn't mean that there seems to be things that we don't need to be saved of. That only means that in the moments when we think we need to be saved, we begin to depend on the voice for God and the application of the lessons of A Course in Miracles, so that we can learn each moment anew that salvation has been given us, and we have been given everything. And that is the practice of this workbook. I assure you, if you recognize that, perhaps you wouldn't need a workbook, but there's no reason why you reject the workbook, because only proofs show to you that the joy of your own salvation is what's being demonstrated every day in this workbook, and given you a way to learn of yourself and how your own saved heart and mind can work within a world that still seems to need demonstrations of salvation. So be you perfect today. Be you perfect right here and now. Salvation has come. We are living in the resurrection. And let that be the good news. Let that be the good news that you share with your brothers in all your interactions. Salvation, to many whose mind hasn't been turned around yet, seems to be a proposition wherein which they're going to find themselves guilty and requiring punishment, and that the world has been that punishment for their guilt. But I assure you that's not true, because this is an illusion. It's not your reality. And God does not punish his son. God does not send his son into the world to be crucified for his mistakes. God sent his son to demonstrate that there is no such thing as death. No one's being punished, and it's safe to come out from your own hiding places in your mind and recognize that you are love, along with him and along with each other. And in that single recognition, as love being the totality of our reality, there lies our wholeness and our holiness, and that is the salvation of you and of all the world. So go forth and preach that gospel to the world. You might undergo a little moment of crucifixion here and there by Christians who don't want to recognize their own innocence quite yet, but I assure you, in the long run, they will have, as you are now, recognizing the totality of their innocence as their reality. And in those miracles, we will shorten the need for time, and the illusion will simply slip away, and we'll see a bright new world take its place all around us, within us, beside us. And that will include all of our loved ones, and even many of the ones we thought we previously hated, as our new and present loves. So you go forth and have a great day today.